So we'll be talking about renewable energy now. And renewable energy, especially solar and wind, has been doubling globally over the last 3.5 years. So this is really exponential growth, right? Fueling this growth are, of course, tumbling prices. Over the past decade, the cost of solar fell by 80%, which is massive. Onshore wind fell by 57% and offshore by 73%. And this is, of course, really good news. And growth and penetration is set to grow even further at COP28. Many governments and organizations are backing the tripling of renewables by 2030, alongside doubling of energy efficiency. So this is what we will be talking here about in this session. And I'm very delighted to have a guest with me here in the studio, Catharina Grönvall. You are Chief of Sustainability Communications and People Officer. That's quite a wonderful title. And you're at OX2.
I'm at OX2, yes.
So Catharina, welcome to the We Don't Have Time studio in Stockholm, the COP28 studio. Could you please tell us briefly why renewables and nature? Because this is what we're going to focus on when we talk together in this session.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And I'm so glad that you are addressing biodiversity, how biodiversity actually can contribute to attacking the climate crisis. So thank you for that. So just short on OX2, we develop, construct, and maintain solar and wind farms. And just recently, we decided that you could argue that just delivering renewable energy solutions is addressing sustainability, but we said that's not enough. We need to address how we do it, not only the what. So in the how, we now have addressed and said that by 2030, we should have biodiversity initiatives in all the solar and wind farms that we construct.
This is, of course, really interesting and crucial. Just to refer back to the conversation with the scientists, we talk about the various crises, and of course, the biodiversity crisis is interlinked with the climate crisis. So, and by the way, I just want to point out that we benched the elephant for this session, so now we have a wind power plant mill on the table instead of the elephant in the room. It's still in the room, but right now it's on the bench. So why does OX2 want to highlight this topic?
Because sustainability is part of what we do. As I said, we deliver renewable energy solutions, but it's not enough just to do that. It's also how you do it. Of course, it's about your own operations in the kind of buildings that you, offices and so on, but also how can we actually address climate crisis in delivering our parks? So that was an easy decision. Sustainability is part of our business strategy, so it's interlinked, integrated.
Thank you very much, Catharina. And we'll be hearing from a colleague of yours shortly. This is, of course, a very interesting topic. And we have some people in Dubai who will dig deeper into this. So I'm handing it back to you, Nick, in Dubai. See if he's ready. I'm hearing reports that they are really struggling with the heat in the studio. It's outdoors, it's windy, but it's very warm. So let's see if we can turn it over to Nick.
Yes, thanks, Catharina. It gets warmer and warmer. It starts off in the morning quite chilly, and you feel a bit chilly, and then you start off in the afternoon, and you feel like a French fry in a fish and chip shop. But thank you very much indeed. So yes, we've got a fantastic lineup of guests here to see if the rollout of renewable energy infrastructure can actually solve the climate emergency, but also be positive for biodiversity. And with me here to set the scene on the growth of renewables and the urgency to raise ambition is Rana Adib. She's Executive Director of REN21, Renewables Now, the only global renewable energy community of actors from science, governments, NGOs, and industry, headquartered at the UN Environment Programme in Paris, France. She is also the chair of SLOCAT, an international multi-stakeholder partnership enabling knowledge and action for sustainable low-carbon transport. Rana, you've got the floor. Let's hear what's happening about renewables and how they're going.
Thank you so much. Yes, indeed, when we're looking at renewables, here at COP28, we basically have almost a historic moment, and we hope so, because we have over 120 countries asking for tripling up renewable energy capacities and doubling down energy efficiency. So this is a starting point. Now, when we really look at where we are today, the reality is we are burning more fossil fuel than ever. And to address climate change, it's very clear that we need to basically move away from fossil fuel to renewable energy and to energy efficiency, not only in energy system, but also in economy and society. And I think what is really important here is that this really means investment, massive investment and massive development of infrastructure, whether it is renewable energy capacities. So here we need, for instance, to increase the capacities by 3 times. PV is doubling, wind is 4 times almost, but also looking at other renewable energy technologies 10 times. And it's not enough to only look at the energy supply. We also need grid infrastructure, and grid infrastructure needs to double by 2050. I think a big message here is already we need massive infrastructure development, and this obviously has comes along with costs and potentially environmental, also societal impacts. But on the question is, does this also address more than climate change? Yes, it does address more than climate change. You hear it's a bit noisy here, but I think
this is live TV. There's some very noisy people in the studio next door.
Yeah,
they're now very quiet.
Thank you so much, because I thought like I started yelling into the TV, which I don't want to do, right? So infrastructure development means massive investment. It also is a massive opportunity to develop basically renewable energy industry and create jobs. So I think here we already see like a big opportunity for job creation, economic development. And I think one big difference here, if we compare it to fossil fuel, is actually the fact that renewable energy does exist everywhere in the world. So 65 countries have a share of renewables of more than 20%, which already shows that that total final energy consumption. This shows actually that this is being used everywhere. So that's one part. Now, I think on some challenges, we tend to look at the power sector. And that's really a focus. But the power sector is not all, and we really need to look at renewable energy heat and transport also, because this is 80% of the energy we're consuming globally. And what is really interesting here, I think it's showing some of the indications which we need to really address, some principle that we need to address if it is about really taking into account also the environmental impacts. Efficiency needs to go along with renewable energy. And this is important because it allows to reduce the necessary infrastructure we need to build. It allows to reduce cost. That is an area that is very much understood when you talk to the energy consumers, actually, and not only the energy suppliers, the energy consumers, whether it is transport operators, whether it is the industry in the building sector, they have really an understanding that integrating and coupling energy efficiency with renewables is a way to decrease system cost, reach renewable energy targets more quickly, but also reduce the impact. So using infrastructure is one possibility. Another aspect I would like to underline, however, we have indeed technological differences from one sector to the other, but also regional differences. And I think when we're speaking about environmental impacts and societal impacts, it's important to keep in mind that climate change is a global reality. Unfortunately, we're in a situation where especially the most vulnerable countries to climate change do attract the least investment. So if we look, for instance, at the African continent, only 1.6% of the renewable energy investment is going into this region. And that is clearly something where the global community here coming together at COP28 needs to take responsibility to address it and ensure that renewable can really happen everywhere and the transition and the benefits everywhere. Now, on this question of nature Nature and the impact.
Positive, yeah.
Nature positive, exactly.
Yeah.
I think we clearly see that from Rentsch on one side, we always say that the transition is not only a fuel switch. It is a transformation of the economy and of society. And what we clearly see is, even though there is a lot of opportunities from the renewable side and benefits, there is also a lot of misinformation. As a result, misinformation that is also being misused, I guess, and is affecting to some extent the societal acceptance. And when you look into the aspects about the societal acceptance, the impact on environment is really a big impact that is being brought up. I think the good news about this is when you compare, we have done basically analysis from Rentsch on one side with a broad community of experts here to bring the evidence together about the impacts. All in all, it's very clear, any energy infrastructure does have an impact. But when you compare it to fossil fuel, renewables really allow us to not only address climate change, but ensure basically lower environmental impacts. That's one aspect. And when you're looking into the solution that exists, I think this is really a very important information to share. We see that the industry is actually not ignoring the impacts, but really building a lot of solutions to address those. When we're looking at hydropower, for instance, the International Hydropower Sustainability or the Hydropower Sustainability Council is working since over 10 years together with governments, with industry and finance sector to basically create a standard and certification so that the impacts are being monitored and trust is built into those solutions. And that also the societies and often the vulnerable community that might be affected more by renewable energy products are benefiting of it. So I think this is really a big message. Solutions do exist, but they require multi-stakeholder collaboration, so multi-stakeholder between governments, industry, civil society, and to create trust, but also require governments to define basically the regulatory frameworks and the standards so that the impacts are being mitigated.
Right. Good. Yeah. Well, that's a good assessment of where we are. And do you think there are some horizons coming up? Just briefly, I always think about ocean renewables. It's always my dream that they would take off massively. There's some indication it's starting to move a bit.
So I think this is indeed another. So I didn't want to go so much into technologies, but given this question, I'm going to give you some elements here. We see indeed that there is a technology concentration very much on solar photovoltaics and on wind. And when you're looking over the last year, solar photovoltaics in 2022 had an increase of 36%. It's the only technology that has really grown where we had a significant market growth. When we're looking in the other technologies, we clearly see that they are lagging behind. And what was really interesting, so we had just recently or 2 days ago here at COP, a breakfast together with 14 developing country representatives. And one of the aspects that really struck me is that a country like Bangladesh, for instance, or Dominican Republic, where you have space-constrained environment, are really looking into other technologies, whether it is concentrated solar photovoltaics, for instance, or ocean energy was also very much mentioned. So I think it's really listening also to other voices than the ones we normally hear.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. Thanks so much for being with us. And we are going to go to another guest in just a few seconds. But I think we may have a bumper coming, and that will allow a nice changeover. So, I've now welcomed on stage Manuel Pulgar Vidal, Global Lead of Climate and Energy at WWF. Manuel Pulgar Vidal is the Global Leader of Climate and Energy there and the Interim Chair of the IUCN Climate Crisis Commission. He has more than 35 years of experience in environmental law and policy. We met when you were the Minister of the Environment for Peru at COP20.
2014.
2014, right, the precursor to the Paris Agreement. That was quite something, wasn't it? Manuel is going to be talking about perhaps nature, the impact of nature when building renewable energy systems, how we can ensure that renewable energy growth is positive with nature and basically respects nature and biodiversity, because we need the nature as much as we need the renewable energy. So over to you, Manuel.
Thank you, Nick. Yeah, let me share with you some reflections based in three main ideas. The first one, it is we don't have time. That's correct, that is the title. Because science has already pushed us to move an energy transition. And we have to fulfill that in this decisive decade. We are 6 years ahead of ending the decade, and we have to fulfill with the energy transition. But to be clear, what does it mean, the energy transition? What is that package? It is a package of 4 main topics. The first one, it is that we are pushing towards tripling renewable energies. That is a key element. Fortunately, in this COP28, seems that that could happen, but it is good. The second element, it is that we have to double energy efficiency. That is a key element. Also, that's connect not only with economic activities, but with cities. Cities, with people, with consumers. That is a key element, energy efficiency. That immediately moved me to the third one, probably what it is in the top of the priorities of COP28. We have to phase out fossil fuels. And there is always a debate, phase out, phase down, just coal, all the fossil fuels? No, it's phase out fossil fuels, as clear as that. And finally, all of this must be developed under a just transition approach. So that is the energy transition package. But there is a but. The point it is what it could be the effect of this new deployment of renewable energy facilities in nature. The principle it is we must not harm nature. We must not damage nature. So how can we do that? There are some elements that we have to continue pushing for a better development. One of those it is we have to develop rules for permitting and siting. Because if the deployment of renewable energy facilities will mean extension of land, that it could be well biodiverse land, we have to avoid that. We have to define clear rules to don't damage nature. And we have some experience in the past to develop permitting and siting rules for many economic activities. But now we have to focus on helping, supporting the deployment of that facilities under this new framework with clear permitting and siting rules. But Nick, that also moves us into the third element of the triangle. So the package, the permitting and siting, and the third one it is, we know that we have to continue developing mining activities for what it is called the critical minerals. So how can we manage those mining activities in a way in which we can avoid, we can limit any damage to nature by defining new rules? We have some experience with the no-go areas for mining. We have some experience by putting some biodiversity conditions for mining. But in my point of view, we have to go one step forward. We have to develop new rules for a new mining sector focusing on critical minerals. So that is the way in which we can do that. And probably many people could be wonder why. Why it is so urgent, the energy transition, why we should focus on not damaging, not harming nature. Because we have a clear vision, because of the Paris Agreement, we know that we would like to be net zero and resilient by the half of century as a way to don't raise temperature in more than 1.5. That is clear, that is our main star. But by now also we have a clear vision for nature, for biodiversity. The Kunming to Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework has already mentioned to us what is that kind of nature positive vision that we would like to achieve by 2030. We would like to halt nature loss. We have to bend that curve. We shouldn't continue losing species, ecosystems, and habitat. So if we have those two elements that are our main star, the point is how can we put all the actors in an accurate orbit in this main star? We do need to have some gravitational forces. And to do that, we do need to develop those kind of rules. Those kind of rules that means to follow the targets of the Global Biodiversity Framework, those gravitational forces that means also to walk the transition suggested by science. We have to continue following the science. That is a key element. We have to promote a whole of society approach. We have to bring the non-state actors into the table. It is clear what we can see in this COP28, how much and how well this involvement of the non-state actors, it is supporting the process. It is moving things forward. And why? Also because this that used to be, Nick, and you remember that very well, used to be mainly and mostly a political process.
Yeah.
Now it's becoming an economic one. It is a social one, but also it is a moral one. So ethic, the moral approach, it is an imperative for the COPs. It is an imperative to tell to the decision makers, we have to make progress. We have in every COP to move one step towards achieving our objective. We cannot stop. We don't have time. Yeah. And that is the key element.
Okay. Thank you, Manuel. And so it's an interesting topic. And I must say, when we said we were going to have this topic on the show, there was a little bit of me that was pausing and thinking, is this really a big topic? But then when you pour into it, there is obviously legitimate concern that we must be sensitive with the development of renewable energy infrastructure. Otherwise, we could harm nature. And I hadn't really, I mean, I know the arguments about birds and wind turbines, and that's important. But I didn't realize, of course, we could end up kind of just carpeting the landscape in solar panels, for example. So you're part of not an organization, but an initiative, I think, with IUCN, I think, IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency, and others that are kind of looking at this, aren't you? How would you bring in, presumably, guidelines or maybe spotlight innovative examples of where renewable energy is blossoming and also benefiting nature rather than harming it? This is a new frontier in some ways.
It is, and it is true. We, with a group of partners, including UNDP, sorry, to be clear, UNDP, but I'm sure that UNEP could
the
join.
The UN.
No? Plus some of the operators. We have created this community, this coalition, under the title of Clean Action. Clean Action altogether, that is the name. And we have started by defining principles. And the principles, it is exactly to what I've already mentioned or said. It is to continue promoting deployment of renewable energy by not affecting nature. And there are many, many principles in that sense. Because it is true, you can deploy a renewable energy facility in a place without biodiversity. Probably that won't damage any area, any species, or any ecosystem. But on the other hand, if you are, for example, in the tropics, you have to be very cautious on when exactly you can allow to develop these big areas for photovoltaic facilities or for wind facilities. So the idea it is to start by principles, but also to showcase that things are happening. This is an interesting process, Nick, because the COP is showing that things are happening. But we have to organize things around principle, criteria, conditions, pledges, and commitments. That is the way to continue progress in what we think must be the way to fulfill with the promise of Paris and now with the promise of the Global Biodiversity Framework. So Clean Action, it is showing, on the other hand, how well is working an alliance in between NGOs, UN system, and operators, the business sector. And we hope that we can convene soon governments, because that could make a perfect equation to have all the actors working together towards a very well-developed objective.
Good. So, Manuel, thank you so much for being with us. I know you're one of the most in-demand speakers and people at these COPs, and pre-COPs as well, when we talked before. And to find the time to be with us, that's really appreciated, and I think the audience will appreciate that as well. So thank you so much for being with us, Manuel.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nick. And let me finish by encouraging decision makers, negotiators, to produce a strong global stocktake outcome that can give the guidance to the process, to continue developing and deploying renewable energy facilities, but with principles that consider nature also as a main objective for this planet. It is by connecting both that we can be sustainable and we can live in a better planet.
As well as phasing out fossil fuels.
For sure, that is a key priority.
For sure, okay. Thanks, Manuel. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
We're going to go back to Stockholm right now. Back to you, Katarina.
Well, thank you, Nick. Our next guest here is an expert on setting goals and on strategy for making renewables nature positive, both above and underwater. And we have with us Lotta Nummelin. She's permit manager at OX2, and Lotta is a marine biologist from Åland. And for those of you not familiar with this part of the world, Åland is a fairly small island in between, well, to be a little bit not so precise, in between Sweden and Finland. And Lotta has worked with the Baltic Sea issues within academia, public administration, NGOs, and also in foundations. And she now works in the private sector. And she has a passion for combining renewable energy production, increased biodiversity, and multi-use of energy production areas. So this is really spot on what we need to focus on in this session. So welcome, Lotta, and you have the floor, you have the Zoom for your keynote presentation here, and I know you also have some images you would like to share with us.
Thank you very much, Katarina. And meetings from a very snowy Åland, very different from Dubai, I can hear. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about our contributions to solving two of mankind's biggest crises, the climate crisis, of course, and the loss of biodiversity. And with the OX2, we have the ambition of nature positivity, as Katarina in the beginning said, which means that we aim to create higher natural values within our projects when we're done than before. And I know this is a really high ambition. And it's really exciting to go on this path. Could I have the next slide, please? I will mainly focus on offshore wind energy production, but of course the same also goes for other projects. Next slide, please. Within OX2, we use this mitigation hierarchy as the base of our thinking, where step one is to avoid harm, as we heard from WWF. So we avoid areas with high natural values. The step two is minimizing the environmental impact. We choose better methods. We, for example, do our work in different times of the year. And of course, this fast development of technical solutions such as radars and others gives us lots of new possibility to always also minimize the impact. We gather, of course, a lot of data. We conduct field surveys. We make models to predict changes in the environment in our permitting processes. And we hope that this knowledge also can be of benefit for both science and monitoring within society, and that we, through this, also can create a greater understanding for the complexity of our marine ecosystems. The next step in the hierarchy is restore, and here we have really, really interesting possibilities when it comes to offshore energy production and when you produce hydrogen in the production parks. When you produce hydrogen, you split the water molecule, which gives you a byproduct of oxygen. And we are looking into the possibilities to use this oxygen to oxygenate the depths of the Baltic Sea. The Baltic Sea is considered one of the most polluted seas in the world, and it suffers from oxygen depletion in large areas at the bottom. So if we could do that, we could have many beneficial impacts. We could restore, for example, cod spawning grounds that we have lost already, and we can stop the internal load of phosphorus to the sea. Could I have the next slide, please? Then we come to the really exciting part, which is the nature positive part. And in the offshore wind, we introduce a hard surface from the sea bottom up to the surface when you have the sunlight. So we create a totally new habitat in these offshore areas, so-called reef effects. And here at the Åland Islands, we have established a test lab, our project Björkskär, which I also have the island of Björkskär behind me here. And here we test different surfaces, different structures, different materials to find out what kind of foundations we could use and different artificial reef structures that really could fit our condition and that we could increase the biodiversity in our part of the world. So here are a few pictures from our tests. Could I have the next slide, please? Of course, and a really important part of this is also to finding methods to measure our success. Do these actions actually work? And these kinds of methods are developing also really fast, and we are collaborating with some initiatives, for example, the CLIMB project, which is together with EcoGain, where we are finding first for terrestrial ecosystems, how can you measure the increase of biodiversity? But I'm sure that the marine environment will come really soon after. And we also test how can we use these areas in other ways as well, for example, for food production, seaweed production, mussel cultivation. And we do this together with our excellent partners. So next slide, please. So to sum up, we live in incredibly interesting times. We have an interesting journey ahead of us. We are combating climate change. At the same time, we are making sure that we don't lose additional biodiversity, that we could even increase it. And it's really, really exciting. Thank you so much.
This was really, really interesting. A question here, in terms of goals and strategies, which would you say are key to getting this to be in place?
Well, we kind of need to understand what we mean by biodiversity, and usually we are talking at quite a high level about biodiversity, but when we come to projects like this, we really need to understand on a species level, for example, or not in our area, what does biodiversity actually mean, and how can we increase it? And that's really interesting to discuss, for example, with scientists to get a deeper understanding. Biodiversity has also always been a bit of a blurry, hard to understand concept, but now when we're really trying to deal with what does this mean in reality, it opens new understandings of what we mean by biodiversity. That's really exciting for me.
So Lotta, in the terms of processing and also getting the acceptance, not in my backyard perspective, that is of course very prevalent still, does these strategies, can you communicate these and might they even speed up these processes?
Well, we have seen that our project Björkskär has really gained a lot of interest, and we have a lot of visitors. And of course, the natural impact of these projects we are working on is of great importance to people around. And when they come to Björkskär and they see what kind of measures we do and that we actually in the long run could make them better for the environment, they are really, really excited about them as well. So we have seen that it's really opening up people's understanding about the Baltic Sea, about energy transformation and what we can do together, and really trying to combine these things.
Well, thank you. I'd like to ask you to elaborate a bit on the oxygenation of the seabeds, because as you stated, the Baltic is dead, and the bottom of the Baltic is dead in large parts of this huge inner ocean, inner sea. So how can this process really help?
Well, as I said, we have bottoms, very big areas in the middle of the Baltic Sea where we don't have any oxygen. But of course, nothing can live that breathes oxygen. In order, different kinds of trials with aerating and oxygenating these bottoms has been done for many, many decades. But now the situation is a bit different where we have this energy production there, so we can use the energy we have, and since the oxygen is a byproduct, we don't need to put a lot of energy of actually trying to find the oxygen from somewhere else, and we can really efficiently use this oxygen to oxygenize these bottoms, which could have a really big impact on the Baltic Sea. So that's really exciting.
So, Lotta, how do you measure and how do you communicate success? Because it sounds like you're already gaining some momentum here, and they're good examples to share.
Well, first of all, by testing, by actually going out there, putting stuff out there and see what happens, because nature is kind of unpredictable. So you need to actually see what's going on. Of course, you can learn a lot from literature, but then you need to test. And you need to test them in the conditions when you're building the offshore park. That's one thing. The other thing is, I know it's a bit lame, but it's so important. That's collaboration. It's the buzzword for everybody, but it is so important that we combine the knowledge we have in science, the practical measures we have for people who live there. So just doing this together, and for us, for example, working together with our technical team and our biodiversity team to finding the right solutions is so crucial, because otherwise we can find out a lot of really exciting ideas which then won't work in real life. So it's really important that we do this together.
So how can this work be transferred into standards, let's say for all renewables, not just for your company?
Well, I of course hope that, say, 5-10 years, this will be an industry standard, that in the permitting processes that we will have also this nature positive part. We have a few issues to solve before we are there, but I think it's kind of there is a lot of ambition, so I don't think it will be impossible. So I hope that we could build the best energy production offshore here and learn from each other, and then of course pass on the knowledge we have from here.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for joining us here today, Lotta, and for sharing your insights. And I'm now handing it back to Nick.
Thanks, Katarina. Back here in Dubai, I've got three fabulous guests to actually discuss this in a little bit more detail. I've got Dean Cooper. He's the global energy lead for WWF and currently managing WWF's global energy strategy, which is called Faster, Greener, Fairer. He has 7 years with UNEP in Paris, the UN Environment Programme, on scale-up investment of sustainable clean energy tech worldwide. We're also delighted to have Rachel Asante Owuzu. Pretty good, not bad?
Not bad.
I'm scoring points every time I pronounce tough names for me anyway. Yeah, but don't worry, the people mangle my name, Nuttall. I get Knuckle in America and Noodle in other parts of the world. She's Senior Program Coordinator at IUCN. Rachel is the Senior Program Coordinator for Climate Change at IUCN, a molecular biologist by training. Rachel has been with IUCN for over 12 years. Lastly, but not least, Antonella Battaglini. Okay, Battaglini? Okay, thanks. CEO of Renewables Grid Initiative, which she founded in 2009. And this is a unique collaboration of NGOs and the transmission industry from across Europe, promoting transparent, environmentally sensitive grid development to enable steady growth of renewables and fuel the energy transition. So I'm going to go to you first, Dean, because WWF's got a new report out, or it's it's basically a new report out on this issue of how do we manage renewable energy infrastructure development, which we desperately need for climate action, with the fact that we also need to look after our nature, and because we need that for climate as well, but also for a heck of a lot of other things. Yeah, what are the kind of findings you're broadly seeing?
Well, I think I should perhaps just go back to the origins of the report, because back earlier in the year, one of the first outputs of our sort of coalition linking energy and nature for action, or the Clean Action Coalition, was a nature safe energy report. And that talked about how we can implement renewable energy with the least disruption to nature, because there's clearly going to be some disruption. But I felt then that we'd sort of looked at that issue. We've got recommendations to governments, we've got recommendations to installers, to financiers. But I was told by our US office that people are still saying, are renewables really better than fossil fuels? And I thought, oh goodness, well, I thought as energy people, we've known that for a long time. But no, cut a long story short, we did a report on nature positive energy transformation. And really looking at in some detail about, there were 30 different metrics to try to look at what was the impact. So looking at things like water quality, air quality, water use, mining was an issue, biodiversity impact, and trying to assess what was the implication of renewable energy activity on nature. Now, 27 out of those 30 metrics said very clearly that not business as usual with fossil fuels, but a rapid transition to renewable energy is going to be much, much better, 2 to 16 times better. But of course, then the first question that comes back on that is 27 out of 30, so what were the other 3? And in fact, there are issues with renewables. There are issues with any new energy source. And those 3 in particular, looking at land use, for example. If we want wind farms, we want solar power, it's going to be using land. We've got to think about what do people do with food production in some areas. Similarly, looking at the impact on water, I mean, free-flowing rivers as well. If we want hydropower, that's going to impact on the rivers. So there are issues that need to be managed. And I think that's the final message from that report is, look, we can do renewables well, and we can do renewables not so well. So let's make sure that we understand what the impacts are going to be, manage that appropriately, and we do 100% renewable energy as soon as possible. And that, going back to the document you mentioned, is the bottom line: 100% renewable energy, faster, greener, fairer.
Okay, super. Rachel, IUCN has also been working on this. I've seen several documents on the website there, which is how, in a sense, we found you. Does what you're finding sort of chime a bit with WWF, that we need renewable energy to deal with climate change, because if we don't deal with climate change, nature is going to be in trouble, but we need to do it in some more sensitive ways?
Well, yes, but I'm going to come back on you with one point. We need to tackle biodiversity, because if we don't tackle biodiversity, we can't solve the climate problem. We need functioning ecosystems so that we can have carbon mitigation actions, so we can have adaptation actions. So it's not about trying to solve both. You can't solve the climate crisis without solving the biodiversity crisis. You're right. We've done a number of guidance documents. We've got that guidance documents that are aimed at companies around how they can mitigate their impacts towards biodiversity. We are now looking at developing guidance documents for our state members, because at IUCN we're a global conservation union, which means we have NGO members, state members, and indigenous peoples members. So we've spoken to our state members, and we've asked them what are the challenges that they are facing. And one of the challenges is around spatial planning. Where are the go areas? Where can we put renewable energies in fast? The other challenge is the grids, but I'm going to leave it to your next guest to talk about that. But that's why IUCN is collaborating with RGI, because we have 75 years experience of developing guidance, developing tools, developing metrics around biodiversity restoration. But if we're going to solve the climate crisis, we're going to have collaborations with different specificities, different skills. And we'll bring our skills in. I'll leave it to Antonella to discuss what her skills are.
All right, let's go to that then, because you've signed an agreement, Antonella, with IUCN on the grid aspect, but also on this whole nature positive, or how can we not harm nature with renewable energy development. What is the aim of this, and how does it fit into the grid story?
We call it Ginger.
Ginger?
Yes.
It's called
Ginger.
All right. I'm sure somebody will tell.
Global Initiative for Nature, Grid, and Renewables.
Okay, I thought it was a cat for a second. We used to have a cat called Ginger, but
no, well, it is also a tea, but no, it's something different. And actually, it's not just an agreement between IUCN and RGI. It is rather a joint effort to bring all the different stakeholders under one roof, the IUCN roof. We will bring our technical great knowledge, which is unique and very niche. IUCN will bring the 75 years of biodiversity experience, and together with all the other stakeholders, we want to agree on a limited set of assessment criteria to evaluate the contribution towards nature positivity of grids and renewables, mainly wind and solar. So this is very new because up to now, everyone has been trying to invent its own assessment tool. And we say, forget about that. We don't want to compete on this. We want to collaborate. And this is why Ginger goes to the root of the problem and finds a common platform where we not only can standardize approaches, we can reduce greenwashing, but we also will provide technical assistance to implement this new methodology.
So basically, it's going to be, I hate the word checklist, but in other words, some kind of recommendation. If you are going to do renewable energy, these are the things that you have to watch to make sure that you also look after nature, in fact, nature positive, rather than just not doing harm, but actually enhancing nature, perhaps. And is that correct? There's some, yeah.
So it is renewables and grids, because if you do renewables without grids, you've done nothing.
Yeah.
Just to make it clear.
No, I understand that, yeah. But I mean, so it's the grids and also the renewable energy.
So there are two elements, and I leave it to Rachel to go more in depth. There is one, a procedural part, where it's a checklist.
Yeah.
But then there is a much more technical part, because we need to evaluate which measure really contribute to nature net.
We need to start agreeing on metrics. We need to start agreeing on what good practice looks like for the energy transition, and that's what Ginger's there for, and that's why it's got to be inclusive. It's not exclusive. It's inclusive. And we launched it just half an hour ago, and in the launch, one of the things I said is, for climate change, everybody's got to win. There's not one region that can run forward with renewable energy, do it brilliantly. It doesn't win the climate change challenge unless we're all there. And so more than a checklist, I look at it as an assurance measure. If it's there to help. It's there to remind you of how to do things and how to do things properly. And I'll just add that at IUCN, we don't have the technical expertise of the grid development, but what we do have are 16,000 scientists with skills and expertise in issues around species, in issues around forests, and issues around environmental law. And we'll also bring them to the table as part of Ginger as well.
Okay. So this is announced today. Wow, so we're actually breaking news here in not just getting hot, but we're breaking news as well, which is hot news. That's really good news. So thank you. Dean, you've listened to these two wonderful ladies. How does this chime with your work? Does this sound like a good initiative, and should WWF be involved? I don't know.
No, Nick, it's a terrible initiative. I wouldn't go there. No, look, I've been in contact with both of these ladies over some time, but not enough contact. So I've been aware, and we've been talking about bringing together. And I think this is a critical element, is that we can't continue all doing our own activities separately. We're all trying to reach a common goal, and we can certainly get there much more effectively and with much more efficient resourcing if we can pool our resources so that we can work together on that. So certainly that word I've just mentioned now, together, I think all of us have said during the launch earlier today of Ginger, we felt that is the critical aspect. We have to try to work together with the private sector, policymakers, the financiers, the implementers, and the civil society arrangement. So it's a question of how can we do that most effectively. Now, I think as far as the impact on nature is concerned, that's also an issue which is becoming more critical. People are starting to recognise the issue that's involved. So my impression is that we don't have to talk about the climate crisis anymore in terms of raising awareness, because people are knowing about that, especially the people at this sort of event. The energy crisis wasn't really on the agenda until a couple of years ago, after the gas issues and the invasions. Now we've got the climate crisis and the energy crisis. We need to add to that the nature crisis. Mm-hmm. In my first week after joining WWF, I was told that we've lost 70% of biodiversity in the last 50 years. Mm. That made a big impact on me. 70% loss means we really should be doing something about it. So it's not a question of either climate or energy or nature. It's really the combination. Yeah. And it's important for us to have the nature-based organizations talking energy and energy-based organizations talking nature. So great to be with these.
I know we're running a bit short of time, but I wanted to ask, I mean, so it's not that we haven't just suddenly got nature and we haven't suddenly just got renewable energy. We had nature for a very long time, renewable energy a little bit more recently, and the grids as well a little bit more recently. But are there some examples that you can point to, anybody where, you know, a grid developer or renewable energy developer and nature has worked hand in hand? It's been positive. It's a pin-up, a poster child or something like that.
And then
we have plenty of examples. At RGI, we have been collecting examples. We are giving an award. I'm going to name, for example, grid corridors. You have 1,000 kilometers of grids, and you can manage these corridors in an environmentally friendly way. You can design the corridor to become an enhancement to nature. You can do pollinator, you can do meadow, you can do so many different things. The only limit is our imagination. In the offshore, we are looking at fish hotels, coral reefs restorations, new meadows of oysters. This is a fundamental shift in the mindset also of the energy actors that now recognize that whenever they put infrastructure in place, they can do something good for nature. Mm-hmm.
So I just want to add that for me, part of Ginger's aim is also to be able to communicate these good practices, because, you know, for tens of millions of people around the world, the energy crisis never left. They don't have energy, and electrification is an opportunity for us not just to solve the biodiversity crisis, the climate crisis, but to put tens of millions of people who are not on the grid on the grid. Last year was the first year in decades where the number of people without electricity rose. We're now back to 2013 peaks, and most of those are in sub-Saharan Africa. So there are lots of crises going on, and there are good practices. And the aim of Ginger is to push those that are doing well further, but also to help those that are coming onto the transition pathway and to help them make the right decisions as well.
But it's a timely moment, isn't it? I mean, I know this tripling of renewable energy as an outcome at the COP and the doubling of energy efficiency is something that, you know, we can celebrate. I actually think it's quite modest as the tripling of new renewable energy by 2030. I mean, other people say it's easily going to be 5 times the way things are going in terms of exponential growth. And I mean, solar power doubled its capacity, in the last 18 months. So, I mean, you know, there is a big surge. And if they get a phase out of fossil fuels, that's another impulse towards a cleaner energy future, which we desperately need. So it's an ideal moment that this issue that you are discussing right now is actually being discussed, and that there are ideas going to be coming forward on how this can benefit nature. Am I right? I think I am. Yes?
You're right.
Thank you. It's the first time in the entire time I've been at the COP that somebody said you were right.
No, but I think, Nick, I mean, just to emphasize what you're saying, I think, you know, there's this sort of verbal agreement, at least, to this tripling of renewable energy, and it really is not enough by a long, long way. But we do have to deal with the implications of that. So it's very easy to say, yes, we want lots more of something very quickly, But what does that actually mean? And I think this issue on the grid is a good case in point. It means we've got to have the infrastructure in place. It's not just a question of more wind and more solar, it's how do you deliver that? And therefore grid infrastructure is going to be a critical element. It's not just the grid. We've got to think about siting, planning, thinking about the critical minerals issue, which comes up. Renewable energy requires that. So it's really not just about fossil fuel phase out. That's clearly, we want a commitment, a real commitment in the agreement from this event to say that fossil fuels really have to go. But then how do we replace fossil fuels? How do we do that cost effectively? And as Rachel is saying, how do we think about those people that don't have energy supplies at the moment? Yes, so energy access is a critical element of this just energy transformation which we need to see.
Where do you go from here? Where does, from this launch today, this conversation here, which thank you very much indeed, there's millions of people watching this show, and then they probably never even thought about, like I hadn't really thought about this nexus here. Where do you take your plans?
In January, we start working. Up to now, it has been a crazy idea of two crazy women, you know, and now we are realizing.
Not so crazy.
And now we are realizing it. But yeah, it's not so crazy because we need it. And I would like to mention that tripling up is good. Phase out of fossil is better, and we cannot tripling up without nature. We cannot tripling up without people. And so that's why I think Ginger comes at the right moment.
Yep. Back to work in January. I think the aim is now to get as many people involved as possible. It's about being inclusive. It's about being global. And it's also about listening. We're not coming with prescribed solutions. We have examples, we have case studies, we have experience, but it's also listening to people, finding out what their challenges are, what their bottlenecks are, and working together.
Good. So we're just going to wrap up here, I think, but I wanted just to comment on one thing since we last saw each other, because we were together at New York Climate Week when we were broadcasting from there, and we were talking about the absurdity that the grids in Europe, UK as well, USA, people couldn't find interconnections to the grid for renewables, which seemed also totally absurd, right? And we were discussing that. Yes. And then I know at least the UK has announced something on that just in the last week or so, that they want to deal with that issue. So that's quite positive.
Everyone is announcing something. Good. Everyone wants to deal with that. But announcement and implementation are two completely separate things.
Yes.
And implementation comes on the ground. It takes different skills than talking to a microphone.
Oh, I never thought about that. So if I had no skill sets at all.
We wouldn't say that. We wouldn't say that, Nick.
But no, I think just underlying that message, it's the words into action that we need to see. We've been talking for years, decades. I'm having meetings here, and I could have written the script 20 years ago. It's the same words. We need to translate that. And this sort of is a great example of how we can do that with this new initiative. So let's see more of that, and let's work together to achieve some real practical outcomes.
And let's be back on shore with some clear results.
Yes, we'll have you back for sure. Good. Well, we're going to have to wrap up there. I think 3 fantastic guests as part of some other fantastic guests on this very interesting and emerging topic. I'm glad that we were there, and thanks to OX2 for being with us as well in Stockholm. I think I have to hand this now back to Stockholm. So back to you, Katarina.
Well, thank you very much, Nick. Katarina Grönvall and I, Katarina von OX2, we've been listening in with great pleasure here on this session. So, Katarina, what are your key takeaways from listening to the panels here?
Yeah, thank you. I think it was a very interesting session. Obviously, lots of knowledgeable panel members there. We need to accelerate the access to renewable energy, but we also need to limit the damage when doing so. Biodiversity is absolutely one of the aspects that we need to address. And we should cooperate and collaborate and do it in partnerships. And I think that's the right way to go.
Excellent. It's very interesting with this ginger collaboration that's being brought out now during the COP. So let's hope it gets a lot of attention and that we keep on talking about this very important topic here. So just one last question for you, Katarina. What's happening now from your perspective from OX2 when it comes to biodiversity connected to the wind farms?
Yeah. So as we have taken this decision to address biodiversity, we've also increased, accelerated the initiatives and the knowledge in doing so. And as the company is sort of developing, moving into new markets, we're also learning from our new markets. But I think one key issue that which has been a good decision, is to treat sustainability questions as our business strategy, because then it gets done. So I think what is measured gets done. So I think that's key.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thank you.
And this concludes this session on renewable energy and connected to biodiversity crisis. And let's move on to the next topic.